We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 5th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Niall Song.
Good morning, everyone.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Now, tomorrow is Memorial Day, 현충일 in Korean. It's a day dedicated to the soldiers who sacrificed their lives. For more, take a look at the screen. Ever since 1956, which was a few years after the Korean War, South Korea has dedicated June 6th as Memorial Day, a day to commemorate soldiers, especially those who gave their lives on the battlefield. In Korea, there are two wars that cost the lives of many soldiers, the Korean War and Vietnam War. On this day, the president, government officials, and civilians gather at the Seoul National Cemetery to pay their respects. Sirens ring all around the country, and the Korean flag, taegukgi, is put at half-mast. But as more time passes since Koreans have seen active combat or warfare, many, especially young people, are using Memorial Day as another day off work. They're using it to go on vacation. Some even know it as a day to eat meat because the number 6 in Korean sounds like meat. That's why NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions today. 1. What exactly is Memorial Day in Korea, and how do we spend this day? 2. Compared to older generations, how does our generation perceive this day and those who fought for our country? 3. How should we better cherish this day then? Tomorrow is June 6th, Memorial Day, and as you can see here in the studio, we're all wearing black to commemorate all the soldiers who fought for our country. And now, why don't you start our discussion by explaining to us what this day is about?
So, like we were saying, this is a day to remember those who gave up their lives for this country, Korea. And Korea, being geographically located between China and Japan, faced many invasions and wars, and we had to fight to keep our land. And even after Korea became, officially independent with our own government in 1948, the Korean War broke out, and it took more than 400,000 soldiers' lives, and they fought for our freedom, for, the freedom that we have today, as well as countless other civilians. So this is a day to remember those people. Now, based on its original intention, people should be at the National Cemetery and paying tribute to the fallen soldiers, but that doesn't seem to be the case in many Korean households, especially younger ones. First, Walter, why don't you tell us how our generation spends Memorial Day compared to previous generations?
Well, so traditionally Memorial Day, you would see many houses and apartments hang out the taegukgi or the Korean flag outside their windows. I even believe that some apartments actually had them installed with flagpoles specifically for this sort of reason. Like many other countries as well, they have a minute of silence, and in South Korea it is done at 10 a.m. and this is to the sound of sirens, as we heard in the VCR. In other countries it's done either by bugle or some other instrument. However, sadly, as the years have gone by, we have seen many people not celebrate this day, or at least remember this day as an important day in Korean history, as it's a very important holiday. Less people are participating in the minute of silence, as well as, not putting out their flags.
Exactly.
It's extremely sad for our ancestors who really fought hard for this country and, like Naya mentioned, for our freedom.
Yeah, to give us the life that we're enjoying right now. And more people actually see this day, 현충일, as an extra holiday. But I hear some even dedicate this day just to eat meat because of the numbers. Yungyuk, which in Korean is actually pronounced as meat, right?
Right. So Yungyuk, so June 6th in Korean with the 6th number is actually pronounced the same as meat, which is yuk. And yeah, so I guess people started marketing this in grocery stores and butchers, doing sales on different types of meat. So people started getting to know that, kind of like, how they market Pepero Day 11/11. And I guess Koreans really like the symbolism behind, the numbers.
For sure.
But, it's kind of sad because it's a national holiday commemorating, those who sacrificed for us. But maybe if we are doing all things, paying our respects and doing, the meat because it's alongside with it, it's one thing. But if we're not remembering and commemorating in the right way and just remembering it as a day to eat meat, it's a shame. It really is.
It definitely is a shame, and I think it's up to our generation to remember what this day is really about and commemorate all these fallen soldiers, because even now we're seeing so many wars happen. In Ukraine, we covered this on NewsGen. Soldiers that are even younger than us are risking their lives at the moment in the war with Russia. So what do you guys think about the fact that Memorial Day is no longer commemorated or sharing the original intention it should be having?
Well, you both mentioned it. It's absolutely a real shame that we don't do this. I mean, I was born here in South Korea and I grew up in Australia, and Australia still commemorates their fallen with two Memorial Days, Anzac Day, which is on the 25th of April, and Remembrance Day, ironically, on November 11th.
Wow, Day.
Wow.
So, interestingly enough, that it's kind of interesting that it coincides the same day. So, I think we owe so much to the Korean soldiers and also the soldiers from other countries that came to help during the war, because without it, we may not be here today.
Exactly. Good point. What about you now?
Like we were mentioning, young people have started, stopped putting flags up in front of their apartment buildings, but people have started posting online on social media, maybe the Korean flag, depending on what holiday it is, to talk about what day it is. And there's actually even this flag that you can put up on your messenger app.
Really?
Yeah, and so I think that's a new way that the young generation is, communicating to other people that we are remembering. But yeah, I think the older ways of doing things, like the moments of silence and raising the flags and singing the national anthem, I think it's all beautiful and we should continue to do it. There's something beautiful about doing things the analog way.
Yeah, right.
And it's great to hear that our generation does commemorate this day, but in a new and evolving way based on how fast and quickly digital front has been developing. And to find out more about what this day is and how we should be spending it, we'll include a retired South Korean Army Lieutenant General in our talks. He'll join us right after this. Let's hear from a retired Lieutenant General who used to be a commander in our military special forces. It's Lieutenant General Chun In-bum. Great to have you here on our show.
Hey, good morning.
All right, on today's show, we want to better understand Memorial Day and the many courageous soldiers who risked their lives for us, like yourself. And before we go any deeper, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and how you became a commander in the ROK Special Forces?
Well, I served for 38 years in the military. I commanded from platoon, which is about 35 men, to a division, which is about 12,000 men and women. I deployed to 2 combat zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. And the government gave me the privilege of being the commander of the Korean Special Forces, which is the best men and women in the Korean military. And I made it better.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant General. Now, Noelle, do you have any questions?
Yes, as we've been discussing, the Memorial Day is coming up and younger people are starting to forget why we should bother to do all of this. So if you could tell us from your perspective why we should commemorate Memorial Day.
Well, I heard your discussions and I think pretty much you covered all the points. But it's a day of remembrance, and the month of June is a day of remembrance and celebration. But it is also an opportunity for us to reconfirm our commitment and resolve that we will protect and defend our freedom and our way of life.
Wow.
So in that reason, it is very important.
That we will continue to do that for the future generation as well. That's so good.
And Lieutenant General, first of all, thank you for your service in your time during your time in the military. I guess that you've also had the opportunity to talk to many young people, but how do you feel and when you hear that many young youth don't know the actual meaning of the significance behind Memorial Day? Does that really affect you?
Yeah, it's a little bit concerning, but in some ways it's natural for a liberal, open society like Korea to forget. but forgetting is very dangerous. I think we need to have a better education of our people. And I think what this program is doing right now is great. So in that fashion, I'm a little bit worried. But I've commanded young people, and I can tell you, the younger they are, the better they are. We have some really strange habits within our young people, but we have some really great people, and the Korean development story, the miracle that the world talks about, is evidence of this. So I'm not worried about the younger generation, but I am worried about the education of the Korean system that we have right now.
All right, I would like to ask you the last question in regards to your last comment. Education seems to be key. We shouldn't forget history. We should constantly and actively try to remember what happened, especially since we're still living in an era where we're seeing war, a lot of young soldiers out at the battlefield. So what would you like for our generation to do on this day and really remember or actively try out?
So the most dangerous thing is to take freedom for granted.
Right.
We must never, ever do that. Freedom is definitely not free. As you just said, even now, as we speak, thousands of young men and women are along the DMZ on high mountains, operating radar stations, in the seas, risking their lives, in the air, risking their lives to protect our freedom and the way of our life. So for that moment, for at least this moment, we should remember, again, that freedom is not free.
Freedom is not free, thanks to you and the many other soldiers that are still working to this moment to actually give us that. Thank you so much, Lieutenant General.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and after our talks with the Lieutenant General, I really cherish the fact that I'm living in such an open, liberal, free world, all thanks to many soldiers like himself. What about you?
Yeah, obviously, I actually grew up around a very military family, to be honest with you. My father served as in the Navy as well. My grandfather served in World War II, which is actually a replica of of his medals, as you can see here, that he served in World War II. So to me, it's a very important day, and I really don't take it for granted because, as we mentioned, we're here today because of the fallen soldiers of the past.
And we should never forget that.
And we should never forget that, no.
Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, you know, what affected me from his speech was that it's a continuing thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, in other parts of the world, people are still fighting for it. And I don't think freedom is something that you fought for, you gained, and then it's like that for the rest of time. You have to continue to fight for it, or else somebody might take it from you. And that's why this day is so important, is that we have to continue to remember what they've done so we can continue that.
And I would also like to note their courage. You know, they're all people in our age. They all started, even the Lieutenant General, he started so young in his career. Can you believe you would go out in the battlefield and risk your life? The courage and the actual motivation to save other people's lives is just amazing. And before we continue our talks, we're also going to hear from our global viewers. We asked if they have a Memorial Day of their own in their country and how they mark it. So take a look at the screen. Join our hire said, in my country, Romania, there are 2 days to commemorate heroes. The 9th of May, the end of the Second World War, and the 25th of May, Heroes Day. Going to memorials with flowers is the way to remember their sacrifice for the country for freedom and peace. And Kareli Laduk said, in Canada, our Memorial Day is on the 11th of November every year. Oh, another one. Yeah. Now, starting from November 1st, people can donate money and receive plastic poppy flowers that we wear on our coats for the entire month. I think that's a really good idea. Sean Quinn said the United States celebrates Memorial Day on the last Monday of May. It's a federal holiday, so everyone has the day off. It's for honoring and mourning soldiers in the USA military who died. There are usually ceremonies held in every city honoring them. And I think it's also worth noting, even here in Memorial Day for Korea, there were so many international soldiers who actually risked their lives and fallen on the battlefield. So it's worth noting that we should recognize all of them. And before ending today's discussion, let's talk about how we can properly spend Memorial Day tomorrow. I'd like to start off by explaining how to hang up your taegukgi. Normally, you would just raise or just display the national flag at ceremonies or certain occasions. But in days of mourning or when you have to pay respect, as you can see on the screen, the national flag must be flown at half-mast, and the gap between the top of the pole and the flag should be the same as the height of the flag. Now, those are my tips. Would you two in the studio like to give your own 2 cents on this?
Well, I think if you're lucky enough to still have a grandparent who may have served in the Korean War, you need to show them that you respect them, thank him or her, and appreciate what they've done for this country. It wasn't just soldiers, nurses as well that served. So it should be also thought not just as the people who fought, but also the people who looked after the people who fought, and most of the civilians as well need to be remembered as well.
That's such a great point, because we're not only talking about those at the battlefield, there were those behind the scenes who were helping these soldiers, or even orphans, or anyone there who was actively trying to help anyone at the war front. Now, what about you, Nell?
I think definitely taking this occasion to read up on history, or I like to personally watch documentaries and ask, like Walter was saying, ask the adults in your life, what are some things that you learned that you want to pass down to me? And I think visiting war museums, this wasn't something that I personally did because, I was interested, but I was kind of forced into it. But that's part of education. In the beginning, you don't know what you're looking for. But, my parents actually took me to the war museum to show me how many people died trying to give you what you have today. And educating that, putting that into younger people's minds, that's something that we should do every year.
I completely agree. And that's the point that the Lieutenant General actually mentioned. Education is key, because in order for you not to forget it, you need to constantly look for it, research it, and see where all of your blessings right now have come from. And they're actually from the people that sacrificed their lives for us. And lastly, do you guys have any specific war hero from the past you'd like to pay your respects to, specifically, starting with Nell?
So I was telling you that I visited the War Museum. I went to the DMZ to not by my own will, but once I did go, it was very enlightening, and I saw so many stories at the DMZ. There's a small memorial museum there, and there were stories of different soldiers and maybe even letters that they wrote to their families. And there was one student volunteer soldier who wrote to his mother, and he was defending Pohang during the Korean War. And unfortunately, he actually did die in battle. But reading the real emotions that he had, the fear that he had, but like people say, courage is not the lack of fear. It's still standing up, saying that there's something to fight for despite the fear. And that really moved me. And he was just one out of so many different student soldiers who passed away trying to give us freedom. So I want to pay my respects to student soldiers who fought for us during the Korean War today.
And I think what you just said right now really resonated with me too, because behind every soldier, behind every figure, I think, is a human story that you can relate to. There's emotions there, and there's actual personal relations he must have had
families,
too.
Real families and real emotions.
It's not too far away. It's such a relatable concept. Now, what about you, Walter?
Well, just thinking about it, that our show was to teach the youth about the news. Back in the day, especially early in wars, basically a lot of those soldiers were children, 17. Sometimes they lied to get into duty. So they were, fresh out of high school. So still basically children, legally adults, but basically children. And just imagine that, going straight out of high school, or even not even graduating high school, and going straight into a very terrifying war environment. As we know, we've seen the effects of what war does to people. Post-traumatic stress is a real thing, and it really is something that needs to be taken care of around the world. For me, obviously I need to thank my Korean ancestors for giving me this freedom. Without them, I wouldn't be here today. And as I mentioned, to commemorate my grandfather's service in World War II, I am wearing a replica of his medals. But yes, I think that we should consider everyone who served in the war in a way to fight for their country, to fight for freedom as a hero.
That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Nell Song.
No problem.
And Walter Lee.
Always lovely to be here.
Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day, remembering all the lives sacrificed for the freedom that we have right now. And we are
News Generation.